Welcome to Talk Advocacy to Me, the podcast that dives deep into the world of customer advocacy and loyalty. I'm your host, Liz Richardson, and I'm joined by my dynamic co-host, Deena Zenyk. We're the co-founders of Captivate Collective, and we're here to spark your curiosity and fuel your passion for all things customer advocacy. Each episode, we tackle hot and pressing customer engagement topics for the advocurious to the seasoned pro. So let's dive in and talk advocacy. Hi, everyone. So excited to bring you another hot topic. And this one is quite an interesting one. And I think one that's very practical, which is very exciting for me. So today we're going to talk about how do I amplify every customer advocate? And that can mean a lot of things that I almost played with like the title because I was like, okay, wait, is that how do I amplify every advocate voice? Is it how do I amplify every asset? Is it how do I amplify literally every customer? And I think it can mean a lot of different things. So I think we're just going to leave that open as we talk about this topic today. As always, my co-host Deena Zenyk here to be the other voice in the conversation as we go through this. And of course, our special guest for today. And our special guest today is Shannon Howard. Shannon is the Director of Customer and Content Marketing at Intellum. And Intellum, if you haven't heard of it, is a learning management and customer education platform. And so Shannon can tell us a little bit more about that as we go. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Shannon. Shannon, you're pretty well known in the customer marketing and advocacy space. You've done a really great job of kind of lifting your profile in this area. And I think it's because you're part of a lot of conversations. You're part of a lot of sharing. So thank you for that. And we're excited to have you on here. So you have been, 12 years in this space, serving across a variety of different businesses from marketing to product to education. So we're bringing all of that together in your current job, and you love making complex things simple, which is great because this could be a complex topic, but hopefully it'll be a simple one. You like to connect cool people. That's why I think you're seeing a lot of you in the space, and that you believe education should be accessible and approachable to all. And obviously you're a fan of customer marketing and the whole concept behind it. So why don't you say hello and tell everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Well, hello. Thank you for the intro. Yeah, I'm just thrilled to be here and have that opportunity to share because I think we all have a little piece of the pie here, a little piece of the puzzle that we have our own experiences in customer marketing. It's a huge field. And then to just be able to share some of the things that we've been working on and hopefully make those complex things like content amplification, customer voice amplification simple. So right now I lead customer and content marketing at Intellum. You mentioned learning management system. So if you think about if you're learning from some of the world's leading education programs, so like if you're doing Google advertiser training or Meta advertiser training, you're using Intellum's platform to do that. So we power some of the world's leading education programs. So that's really fun for me because it's kind of like Meta in terms of doing customer marketing in this sphere of people working with customers and training customers.
Awesome. Thank you. We're so thrilled to have you. And fun story as we get into this is Shannon and I met to talk about something completely different. Shannon was a contributor to the CMA Tech Landscape report that came out with Captivate and User Evidence. And then we just started talking and jiving, and I said, this girl has so much to say. We need to get her on a Talk Advocacy to Me. So we are excited to dive into this. I want to make sure that, Deena, people get to hear your voice before we talk into this. So just say hello, and then, what do you think amplifying every customer advocate's voice means?
Hello. And what do you think amplifying every customer's voice means? Shannon, it is lovely to have you here. And Liz, thank you for opening that space for me. I think it's a great topic because a lot of people use the amplification of customer voice in advocacy as a value proposition for getting people to advocate. And it's also one of those value props that's super flimsy because not everyone has their voice amplified, even though that's usually like one of the marquee reasons companies give for people to advocate for them. So I'm all for this conversation and excited to hear some of your best practices and learnings and findings in your very long career, Shannon.
Yeah. Okay. Great. There's Deena, always giving a little bit of a truth bomb at some point, just saying how it is. But Shannon, you had a lot of great ideas around this topic of kind of like solid ideas of what it might mean to amplify every customer. So let's kind of get into some of what those categories might mean to you when you say amplify every customer. What's some hard, concrete concepts that you want people to think of?
Sure. So when I was thinking about this, how do we amplify customer voice? I think I'm thinking, one, there's different personas or roles, right? So you might have kind of the buyer, your program owner, champion, advocate, your admin, everyday end user. And you might have other kind of people who use your platform in different ways. And so each of those people has their own voice, their own story to tell. And some of those voices make sense for a case study or a G2 review or, a Gartner review. And some of those people might make sense more in the other day on the weekly CMA call, we were talking about playbooks. And you might have a much more technical end user who is really not the fit for a reference call or a case study or some kind of customer content like that, but they'd be a great fit to contribute to a playbook or best practices for your industry. So I think about those different types of voices and how do we elevate, because they all have value, but they're not all the right fit for the types of content that we typically think of coming from customer marketing. And then the second one you mentioned earlier, kind of content amplification. And I sit at this intersection of customer and content marketing. So I'm thinking, how do we get customer voices into our content? And then how do we distribute that across platforms? So how can I take one piece of customer content and turn that into 30 different assets? So it's not just a page on my website with a case study, but it's quote cards and it's social posts and it's a slide in the slide deck for the sales team to use. And it's incorporated in a one pager and we're talking about that in a blog and it's a back pocket story. And how am I taking this one asset and breaking it into smaller components? Same way, and I think a good use case would be, we're recording this podcast, right? And it won't just be, it'll be a video, it'll be a podcast. We'll probably do some video snippets on LinkedIn and turn it into different conversation points. So you're taking this one piece of collateral, repurposing and distributing across channels, because the main format makes sense for one channel, but not all these other channels. So how do we take, this time that we've spent with a customer, maximize, I call it like getting the most mileage out of content or customer interviews. How do I get more mileage out of that conversation? So I'm not creating one asset that has one use case, but I can repurpose and distribute.
I think that's so true, Shannon. So we're talking about two sides of the house. We're talking about what form to a customer's voice can take. So what type of content, what type of asset could that voice take? It may not even be an asset. It could be an experience. It could be something that they do on your behalf. So being a little bit more creative and holistic of how we bring customer voice to the forefront. So that's one side of what we're talking about. The other side that you just described is around that idea of the syndication. Once we capture that voice, what do we do with it to amplify it, to maximize it, as you said? And I do think people are bringing and thinking more that way. That could be because customer marketing teams tend to be fairly small. So we are now looking for, maybe some of those big teams have gone away where it was, hey, we're going to create 100 case studies this year. Here's this big, massive team to do it. But thinking more about, not only is that type of content even digested well these days, have our taste changed in what we're willing to watch, what we're willing to consume, but also how do we maximize the effort and that goes into capturing anybody's voice, and think about all the different ways and different channels that could go. So I think, does that summarize the two sides of the house for you too, Shannon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And if anyone has anything they want to add to that, they can absolutely do that. But that's how I see it. Deena, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like another element here, and it's maybe kind of where I was sitting in the intro, that there's customer voice, there's like the intake and the output, the syndication of customer voice to amplify the business's needs and story through the customer. But there's also an element of customer voice that really is impactful and meaningful in an internal way. And so I think when these programs have that value proposition of hearing the customer's voice, it doesn't always mean to the customer that like, oh yes, like I'm going to be in a piece of content or I'm going to be on stage, but just that I want my voice heard. I want my voice heard in a meaningful way by this business that isn't just a CSAT survey or a quick NPS kind of button push, but I want to be a part of the story with this company. I want to impact their roadmap. I want to understand where they're going. So I think there's that element to customer voice as well.
I love that because it's almost like amplifying the power an individual customer has inside of that relationship with the brand. Right. Shannon, you're nodding vigorously. I guess that's also resonating with you.
I love that. Yeah, I think we've probably talked before about customers are already talking to us. Like, how do we actually take that? How do we take the snippet from the gong call with the account manager and get that over to product and get that to support? How do we take, like, when I do a G2 review campaign, I don't just capture reviews, that feedback gets disseminated to support and account management and product to inform their roadmap and process improvements, or just pat them on the back for a job well done, right? So how do we make sure we're not just capturing, but we're actually getting that out to other teams and other people? I think is so important because customers are speaking, but they're usually, it's like in this siloed area. How do we distribute that voice?
You make it sound so easy, but we know the process behind taking just even that review campaign and packaging that feedback and getting it to the right people in a meaningful way that's going to land well. We know that there's just a ton of process that needs to, underlie that motion. So well done on you for making that happen.
Shannon, I feel like not too long ago, I mean, it was kind of, this is so weird to think about, but it was sort of novel in our community for people to be thinking about that flywheel. So you mentioned even this podcast, right? This podcast is made as a flywheel. We have an interview. We're going to have written content off of this. We're going to have quote cards. We're going to have snippets from it. Like, we have intentionally created what we hope is a flywheel of content that all feeds into a bigger piece of a bigger flywheel where we're also using that content to hopefully move people to other points of interest for other content that we have, or even what Captivate does. You have this really interesting idea of these content clusters that help to keep all those pieces of content attached to each other. Can you explain those clusters to us?
Yeah. So I think we've talked about kind of that syndication checklist. We'll come back to that later, but we'll talk about this just idea of clusters. So this is how, so if you think about like a mind map, right? When you were a kid and you're learning how to write a paper and you have like a circle in the middle and it's the main topic of your paper. And then you have little lines to bubbles that kind of have subtopics or things that you're going to talk about, right? So we have content pillars, themes that we write about, and then we have subtopics that link out off of that. But when we're writing about that pillar piece of content, as we create those subtopics, we're linking back to the main pillar content, then we're going back to that pillar content, linking to the subtopics. So all of this content feeds into each other, right? And so if you're a fan of HubSpot and their inbound marketing, if you take their content marketing stuff, they'll talk about this idea of kind of having these clusters, specifically for search, where all of this content is linking to each other. So it has SEO value, but it's also really valuable because if we're talking about this one topic, but then it's linking out to all of this other relevant content that talks about the same topic. And so thinking about that for your case studies too, and you asked for examples. So I was thinking about one, we released a case study a couple of years ago with Gusto. And so we had this whole video with them, and then we had snippets of the video. We had a blog series with them, but that story lives on because we'll pull it into blog content. So I was just looking, I was like, man, I know I've put this in blog somewhere, like where is it? And so we included, I had an SEO blog, what is a learning management system? And we're pulling in parts of their story into this. So it's not just advocacy content where you're your customer stories or voice of customer can live, but you can actually pull this in of, oh, here's how this customer did it, and then link out to the case study. So I'm constantly thinking about where else are we talking about this thing that this customer did, and how do I link back to it, right? So in this case, Gusto had a request for information that they sent to Intellum, and we have kind of a template that we worked on together. So I can link out to that resource and then link back to Gusto and so on. In other case studies, maybe we're talking about something that was a really pivotal part of the product for them. And then when we're in a blog talking about that, I can link out to the case study that talks about that part of the product for that customer. So I'm just thinking about where else can I tie in this content? How can I insert this in natural and meaningful ways? So if you think about a salesperson having a conversation, someone says, it's really important to me to have X, Y, and Z thing or this kind of partnership. And they're like, yeah, well, actually, this customer over here was able to do those X, Y, and Z with our product. And here's how that happened. It's just that same case study being pulled into other ways that you can share it.
I love that. And it makes me just think about content in general. And even that example, Shannon, you gave of the sales guy. Okay. So, but the sales guy may be at different stages of a prospect's journey. So maybe at one stage, it's like, hey, I just need a 3-sentence example of how we've done this for a customer because they're looking for this specific use case. We're really early in the conversation. So does anyone have a quick summary? So do we create those quick summaries of maybe one story has 3 different use cases? Have we correctly or easily documented those quick case stories? But maybe further down the line, he's like, okay, they are really interested. Do we have a video on how we did this with this customer? So then you're able to give this testimonial scaled to this customer. And then maybe eventually it's like, okay, we're getting down to the wire. They want a full kind of breakdown of how this happened. So then maybe we go into the full customer case study. There's just so many different ways, even when you're handing content over to sales, of course, we know this, they want it in different formats. But thinking through what all those different types of formats might be, aligning that to the journey, I think that's really meaningful work. I want to throw in another story, Deena, real quick. We had another customer. We did some work similar to that, right? Explain a little bit of that.
It was creating kind of like a hierarchy for content and for content needs and really trying to help the client figure out, how to not just be reactive inside the organization, but how to position content more proactively. How to say this type of story has, these specific derivatives that flow off of it. This is how people can request, but it was being much more mindful, doing a full audit of their existing content. So to your point, Shannon, it's like we create content and put so much effort into creating content, and then we do it, we go through the motions, and then we move on. And what you just described of looking for ways to continue to give it legs and plug it in places and bring more value. So it was a full content strategy, but from the point of being proactive and mindful. Liz, you threw out the number, we're going to do 100 case studies this year. Not us. I mean, there's no way we would do that, but that, I know there's customer marketers and content marketers out there that are like that. That isn't insane. That is the kind of pressure that people are under. So I think the whole content conversation, the customer voice conversation comes back to Shannon's initial point. How do we do more with less? How do we make more out of a single interaction to fill that pipe so that we're not saying we need 100 case studies, but maybe we need 10 case studies, and each of those case studies has 10 derivatives that are each telling a different angle of the story.
Or we need 10 case studies from those big brands that we can make 10 derivatives of, and we need 20 of these lightweight quote stories, cards, whatever it may be, because we are really being more strategic about 2 things. So Shannon, to your point about how these things tie together in these content maps. So what are my 3 pillars? What type of content do I need around those 3 pillars? Where do I link to those contents from which formats? And then also, how do I create a lot of content from not just assuming I have to go about this? I can't even imagine how much content is out there I look at our own stuff and I'm like, what a waste of time. We have created so much stuff and have failed. Like, we put it up. Oh, it's done. Congratulations. We share it out. Maybe we share it out a few times. Yay, us. And then it just dies on the vine. But how do you, Shannon, go about keeping that, as you think through, oh, I'm creating another asset. Let me bring in pieces from other assets I've already created. How do you keep that fresh in your head? How do you remember where to go or what content to use, or, how do you keep from losing sight of the content that you've already created?
She's super Shannon. She's super Shannon.
This is definitely something that could be improved, right? Because I've created most of our like content, not just customer content, but content in general. So off the top of my head, I could tell you, oh yeah, this customer did a webinar and this was the topic and whatever. One way that we're getting it out of my brain and download it in a way that other people could use it. So we have not just these content clusters, but actual like a content repository, right? So every piece of content we've ever published, is a customer featured in it? What's the use case? What's the product module that it ties to? What's that topic? What's the subtopic? What's the use case, audience, things like that, right? So we're tagging it in all these ways so you could filter and find the kinds of content that you're looking for. And then, we have, once a case study is published, we have a distribution template. And I think we're going to put a copy of this. And I put in the top of this doc for people. It's not a checklist. Brendan Hufford talks about, we don't want to be checkbox marketers. We don't just want to do things for the sake of doing things, but actually thinking, what are those derivatives that would be valuable and useful to my sales team? And not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but doing it because we know it's actually going to fit their workflow, their sales process. But just thinking about what are those ways that we can repurpose this content and then distribute it across channels. My team, we also run socials. Like, we are able to kind of end to end source, write, publish, produce case studies, and then also go distribute them. So we're able to kind of plug those into our email calendar and get it over to our sales team and get it on the social calendar a couple times, and then go back and like incorporate it into content. Or think about it as we're creating new content moving forward, right? I'm not always going to take a case study and then go back and rewrite a piece of content to incorporate that case study. But it's just having that idea of like think about it like product releases, right? Like, a successful product release is not that a product is pushed live and then we make one big fanfare about it and then we like go about our merry way. We want to continue to talk about the product. We want to continue to talk about this new feature functionality that we've released. We want to incorporate it maybe into onboarding or lifecycle flows so that we're continuing to talk about this thing that we invested so much time, money, and effort into. And it's the same thing with our case studies. Like, we don't just want to push play and say, okay, like we did it, and like post about it in the sales channel. Guess we're good. And we want to think about how do we actually create those derivatives, distribute it, and get more value out of the things that we're doing.
It really is like a campaign approach to creating content, which is, there's your overlying campaigns, which are, what are our pillars of content? What do we need to support those pillars from a content perspective? And then as we go out with our stories or the content that support those pillars, we understand what the flow or the use of that content is going to be over time. Certainly not, like you said, press a button, boom, it's live, and we move on. But we have a long tail of how that might exist and connect to the other parts of the overarching campaign, which is those pillars that you have there. Obviously, it's a lot more difficult to think through all those steps, but man, it's a whole lot more gratifying to see that work being used and repurposed over and over and being served up to your prospects and customers in a timely, relevant way, because it's when it's useful to hear those customer voices, bring them back up front, and really you're using that to help others along their journey. So putting those customer voices in front of others at the right time, at the right moment, both internally to make it easy for your team to share those voices, but then externally for other people to hear those voices. They need to hear it at the right time, else it's an irrelevant voice to them. So it's giving it to the right audience and making sure that it's timely for them as well. it can be a lot of content that, and we talked about derivatives and like different ways we call it, content syndication. Um, what should be on my list of different types of content that I can use it on. Shannon, you've mentioned a couple, but I think it would be really helpful for our audience if we just kind of went through some different content types that people could be thinking about as you create a story or as you tell or capture a customer's voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think you have your case study. Sometimes you can pull that into blogs, right? You could do infographics if you have kind of a metric heavy case study, carousels, quote cards for social. My designer creates a lot of templates for us in Canva because I am not aesthetically inclined at all. There's a reason design is not part of my job. And so she makes that like pretty Shannon proof to work, that we can create things that are brand approved for social. We create slides for pitch decks so people can kind of pull. We have like a mix and match case study deck where they have like a one slide overview of a case study. Sometimes we'll bullet point it out for kind of back pocket stories. So if something's a really good use case of like tech stack consolidation, you should know this like the back of your hand to be able to bring up in conversations, or this was a really good expansion play and we should have that story kind of memorized. Something I don't think we probably think about enough is pulling case studies and customer voice into email campaigns, right? So whether it's an expansion campaign or even onboarding. So I did this for one company as part of the onboarding nurture. As I was talking about different parts of the product, I found kind of quotes from G2 reviews where people were talking about those different parts of the product and how it saved them time or how it helped them to do different parts of their job. And then we just kind of incorporated that into the email template, is to hear a little bit from someone else. Because sometimes I think trying anything new, like even if you bought a software, like trying anything new is hard. And so there's some element where after the initial sale, we're still selling them on our product and we're still selling them on using different parts of our product that they haven't used yet. And so that social proof is helpful, not just in acquisition marketing, but in onboarding and nurtures and upsell and cross sell. Yeah, those are a few that I had in here.
Those are great. And I feel like it's almost like the upfront work of deciding or looking at that story that you've captured, and someone with that eye really saying, oh, okay, here's that topic that could be useful at a different point, and here's that topic. And somehow even just creating a tagging. Like you said, the repository is such a great idea. I know a lot of people have them, but a lot of people don't as well. And that idea of, can I look by tag of use case? Can I look by tag of audience? Can I look by tag of the type of content we've created off of this story? Can I, if I'm able to search that as a marketer, as a team of marketers, because I put in that effort up front to do that, how much easier does it not make the other activities we have to do? Like, what are we going to serve this webinar contact list after the fact that's relevant to this topic? Well, if you've created that repository, you don't have to go ask a million people internally at your organization. You can look at your repository and you can say, oh, here's like 3 items. I can do like a 3 email nurture stream, and I have valuable content to give them each and every time. So I'm bringing additional value of work that we've already done. I don't need to stop and go like, oh, well, that was kind of it. No, we have done that work, but we have to do the work up front of capturing what that voice has said to us and how it's relevant to the organization and to our products. Deena, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that this is, this conversation is so helpful because it's so practical. And Shannon, I just wanted to highlight and shout out how practical you are out in the community as well. Coming here on Talk Advocacy to me is great and sharing some of your best practices, but you do that all the time. You are always out there beating the drum and sharing really practical advice and information. And the community, if you're not following Shannon and this type of angle of customer marketing and advocacy is important to you, then you should go ahead and follow Shannon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people know and love you, Shannon. So
Yeah.
we are excited to have you again. I want to close on one final thought, Shannon, and we did talk about this the other day. And it's that idea of being strategic with the content you create versus reactive to the opportunities that arise. And we agreed there's a balance, right? Sometimes you're going to be like, oh, you want to do a story with us? The video? Yeah, absolutely. You're hot. We would love to get that on our paper. But talk a little bit about how you think through that idea of almost like hunting versus fishing and what the strategies behind those might be.
Mm-hmm. I think there's always we start anything reactive, right? You look at any maturity model and the early stages are reactive. So there
Yeah.
are times when you're like, I will take anything you throw my way, I will take it. And then there's also those big brand names, right? We have some incredible customers, and if an account manager reaches out and says, hey, I was on a call with so and so and they really want to do a case study, done, it's on my calendar and it's happening, because like that logo is worth it. But then when I think about how can we be more proactive, right? Because we're a team of two and we do a lot of things besides just traditional customer marketing. And so how do we maximize our time and focus on the things that are most important to the business? Well, yes, customer voice and case studies important to the business, but what versions of those or what types of those are helpful? So we know going into the next quarter, we're going to be targeting expansion within some key accounts. So we're starting to capture case studies within those accounts. So we just had an event, an on-site with one of those customers where it was really like peer-to-peer knowledge sharing of how they're using our platform in different business units across that account. And so we gather all these people together for kind of a half-day event, and then turning those talk tracks into case studies that we can use internally. And fingers crossed, I think one of them we'll be able to share externally with people not within that customer account. So we're looking at case studies within those kind of key accounts. Even if we can't share them on our website, can we share them with new business units within that business? We're expanding into other parts of our product. So we're looking at, well, who's using our, like we have a content authoring tool, who's using that content authoring tool? Can we start to capture some more case studies there? We haven't done that in the past as much, even though people really love that product, just because it hasn't been a business priority. But now it is. So we're going after those case studies. Yeah, so anything where it's like we're going to be selling into this, or we're focused on this use case, this vertical that maybe we hadn't before, then we're going to go proactively source some of those case studies and prioritize those. And then, of course, if a big name comes across our plate, awesome. But if a smaller account, smaller fish comes across the plate, I might say like, amazing, can I get back to you in Q3, Q4, right? Because we just can't do it all. And so,
Can't do it all.
yeah.
And then you may obviously, if you aren't strategic, you may spend a lot of time making a lot of content that doesn't connect to that mind map very easily at this time. Yes, there's always value in capturing every story or voice, but being strategic allows you to start creating all those connections. It's like that image of those computer connections. You got, I'm so non-techie, like the synapses connecting to each other. But, if you have them just sitting alone, yeah, you're going to have to create a lot of those in order to create that map. Whereas if you have ones that connect over and over again, you can do a lot more with less. And I think that's really important, and maybe where we sometimes go wrong, because we get so excited about anyone who wants to do a story, or we put out a scaled ask, like who wants to do something with us, and then we just start gathering in that wheat of like, oh, okay, well, I want to look like I'm doing really good work, so I'm going to do everything I can, instead of thinking through like, okay, but what am I actually going to turn into bread? And that's what we could eat. That's at the end of the day, we need that nutrition. And so we have to think through what can be made into bread at this time. And I love that. I love that idea of being more strategic. Okay. So to summarize, wisdom here from this, which I do agree with, it's just such a practical conversation. And I think we do a lot of conversations on here that have like nice, huge, big ideas, but it's really great to have conversations where we hone it back in, which is expanding how you think about customer voice, what that might be. Shannon, you rattled off some, but it can be product feedback and roadmap. It can be helping another customer. It can be, of course, the traditional marketing and sales content that we create. And then there is the syndication of that content. How do we create all the different types of content that might be useful? And then it's mapping a lot of those together, and not forgetting what Deena said too, is expanding that amplification of customer into what they want, what they're interested in, how they would connect, and their personal brand to the organization as well. Ladies, did I kind of miss anything in that summary?
I don't think so. That was good.
You got it. Yeah.
Woohoo! Snaps for that. Okay, so thank you, Shannon, so much for joining us. That was a great talk. As Deena said, I'll reiterate, if you haven't connected to Shannon, I know she is very open to connecting with people online. That's Shannon Howard at Intellum. She's the only Shannon Howard at Intellum, so you can't miss her. And you can connect with her and message her there if you have content questions about how she does some of that tracking, repository, syndication, content kits, and all of that good stuff. And we'll put some of that in the show notes for you as well. But thank you, Shannon, so much for coming on Talk Advocacy to me.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thanks, Shannon.
This is awesome.
All right, have a good one, everyone.